In the last episode, we looked at how density applies beyond the gym. It appears wherever there is a gap between meaningful effort and the next meaningful effort. The workday, the transition between tasks, the morning, the evening, the space between days. The problem is these gaps expand without our keen attention. The transitions that expand into 30 minutes of nothing. The morning that dissolves before it begins. The day that felt full while it was happening and empty when you looked back on it. Today we close this chapter on density by learning how to apply this signal well in daily life. We'll look at how to choose which transitions to compress and which to protect. We'll also consider the discipline that density in daily life actually requires. This discipline is critical with an ever-expanding supply of distraction, clamoring for our attention. Hey there, it's me, Core, and you're listening to Exercising Consistency from Fitness to Flourishing. Before we look at how to do this well, let's look at how it's done poorly. You don't need to eliminate all space between efforts. The person who schedules every minute, who treats transition time as waste, who moves from task to task without pause, is not practicing density. They're practicing haste. The space between efforts serves a function. It allows the mind to reset. It allows the body to shift posture, context, and state. Eliminating that space does not produce rhythm. It produces carryover. You now go into the next task with a distracted focus and open loops. You don't need to optimize every transition. Not every gap needs to be tightened. Some gaps are recovery. Some are thinking. Some are the pause that allows the next effort to begin with clarity rather than momentum. The person who tries to make every transition efficient is not practicing density. They're practicing the elimination of pause. And the elimination of pause, sustained over time, produces a specific kind of burnout. The exhaustion of too little space between the work. Don't mistake speed for density. Moving faster between tasks is not the same as tightening the transition. Speed is time-based. Density is a matter of intention. You can rush through the gap between efforts and still arrive at the next effort scattered, because the rush was not recovery. It was just a faster version of drift. The goal is not to eliminate the spaces. You need space between your efforts in daily life, just like you need space between sets when you exercise. Make use of them. Discover which spaces serve you and which spaces are just the drift filling the room. Then make the necessary changes. Remember what we're doing here. Taking what you learn in your exercise practice and applying it to your life. Thinking from principle is key. When you have excessive compression in the gym, it produces technique degradation, output collapse, and rhythm without adaptation. The daily life failure mode of density is the inverse. Not compression, but expansion. The spaces between efforts grow without your deliberate decision that they should. Here's what can happen. The drift. A transition that should take 5 minutes becomes 15. 15 becomes 30. 30 becomes an hour. The expansion is never a conscious choice. It is an absence of consciousness. You are running on non-conscious conditioning. You did not choose to spend 30 minutes between tasks. You did not choose to spend an hour on your phone before starting the day. You did not choose to let the evening dissolve into scrolling. The drift happened as if you weren't present, which, for all intents and purposes, you weren't. At least, not consciously. This is the signature of low-density living. The spaces are not designed. They are default. And the default is always larger than necessary because the default is whatever fills the available time. The dissolved day. Drift does not announce itself. It does not arrive with a notification. It accumulates in the gaps. And by the end of the day, you look back and wonder what happened. You did things, but the space between the things was so large that the day does not cohere into a unit. It dissolves into fragments. This is why a low-density day can feel simultaneously busy and empty. The efforts were there. The rhythm did not result. And without rhythm, the efforts do not accumulate into a sense of a day well spent. They remain isolated events, each one disconnected from the next by drift. Recovery, disguised as drift. The most insidious version of this problem is when drift wears the mask of recovery. You tell yourself you are resting, you are recharging, you are giving yourself space. But the space does not restore you, it depletes you further. Scrolling, for example, is not rest, it's stimulus. And stimulus during a period you have labeled recovery is just mislabeled drift. Over time, this produces a specific kind of confusion. You can no longer tell the difference between genuine rest and the drift you have learned to call rest. You take breaks that leave you more tired. You give yourself space that does not return you to readiness. The recovery system of your day, the infrastructure that density depends on, is compromised. And because you called it recovery, you never questioned it. The solution is not to eliminate all the spaces. It's to decide which spaces belong to you and which spaces belong to the drift. Here's what this looks like in practice. Protect one transition. You do not need to tighten every gap in your day. You need to tighten one. The transition that costs you the most. The one where drift consistently wins. For most people, this is the morning transition, the gap between waking and the first meaningful action. Or the post-lunch transition, the gap between eating and returning to work. Or the evening transition, the gap between the end of work and the beginning of a more complete rest. Identify one, not all three of them. That is the transition you will tighten. Define the transition before it begins. The drift wins when the transition has no definition. You finish one thing and look around for the next. In that looking, the drift enters. The fix is to define the transition before you enter it. For example, when I finish this task, then I take 5 minutes, just 5, to reset before beginning the next task. Or, when I wake up, then I stand, drink 500 milliliters of water, and begin the first task of the day within 10 minutes. The definition does not need to be elaborate. It needs to be specific enough that you know whether you honored it. The drift cannot survive a defined boundary. It needs ambiguity to expand. Use a return anchor. The hardest moment in any transition is the moment of return. The break is over. The recovery is complete. The next task is waiting. But you do not feel ready. The drift is still in the room, suggesting that 5 more minutes might be wise. A return anchor is something that signals the end of the gap. It's a simple physical trigger. It is not a decision. It's an action that means the decision has been made. Stand up, close a tab, take a breath, say a word. The anchor does not need meaning. It needs to be reliable. Something you can do without thinking, that tells the system the gap is closed, the next effort begins. The drift wins by keeping the gap open-ended. The return anchor wins by closing it. Leave some gaps alone. This might take the most discipline to apply. This is the ability to protect space without feeling guilty about the space. Not every gap needs shrinking. Some gaps are genuine recovery. Some are the pause that allows insight to arrive. Some are the empty space that makes the full space meaningful. The person who tightens every transition is not paying attention. They are blindly applying a rule without understanding what they're doing. There's a test for this. The test is simple. After the gap, do you return to effort with more capacity or less? If less, the gap was not recovery. It was drift. Tighten it. If more, the gap served its purpose. Protect it. There is a version of yourself that you meet every day at the threshold between one effort and the next. That version is tired. That version wants to check a notification. That version believes that 5 more minutes of drift will make the next effort easier. That version is not wrong about the feeling. The drift does feel easier in the moment. It feels like a well-earned break. But that feeling is temporary and the cost is cumulative. Every time you surrender a transition to the drift, you are not just losing time. You are sending a signal to yourself about who controls your attention. One surrendered transition is negligible. 1,000 surrendered transitions over years becomes an identity. That identity is, I do not decide what happens between the things that matter. The drift decides. I'm a passenger in my own attention. This is the identity cost of avoiding density. You build a self whose attention belongs to whatever fills the gap. And the gap is always filling with something you are not deliberately choosing. It's just on hand at the moment. You wonder why your days feel thin. You wonder why you never seem to get traction on anything that requires sustained rhythm. You wonder why the space between waking and the life you intended to live keeps expanding day after day. You're making the efforts, but the gaps between those efforts keep expanding. When you repeatedly allow the spaces to drift, you condition an attention that expects to be hijacked. The expectation becomes the default. The default becomes the day. And the day, repeated, becomes the life. The reversal of this circumstance takes time, and you must begin where you are. Define the transition before you enter it. When the drift arrives, and it always arrives because it's your conditioning, you notice it and make a better choice. You say, this is the gap I'm protecting. This is the boundary I've set. I choose to reset on purpose with discipline. And you make use of the return anchor. You stand. You close the tab. You begin the next task. Each protected transition is a negligible step, but those steps take you far if you keep repeating. Over time, the signal changes. The evidence your own attention provides begins to point in a new direction. You start to trust that you can move from one effort to the next without losing the day in between. You cannot control how long an effort takes. You cannot control what interruptions arrive or when. You can choose to shape the space between the effort and the next effort. You can choose whether that space belongs to recovery or to drift. You can choose to direct the return. Self-competition in this light is not about packing more into a day. It's about reclaiming the spaces that the drift has colonized. One transition, one gap, one return. The person who shapes the spaces between their efforts is competing with the version of themselves that let the spaces expand. And every time they tighten a transition, they win. Not by much, by the width of one gap. You will have more productive days with this approach, but the real reward is the sense that the day belonged to you. Not just the tasks you completed, but the spaces between them. Density is the third signal. It's the most subtle of the three, and the easiest to neglect. But without it, intensity and volume produce results that feel disconnected from the life that produced them. The efforts were real, the rhythm was not. In the next episode, we begin the fourth and final signal deep dive. Quality. Doing the work well. The signal that turns practice into mastery and mastery into identity. Until then, look at your day. Find one important transition, the one where drift too often wins. Define it before you enter it. Protect it. When the drift asks for more time, use the return anchor. Close the gap. Begin the next task. Shape the gaps with as much focus as you shape your efforts. To exercise consistency and become the person who uses these signals to train for every part of your life, join the ACT Score Challenge. That's it for today. Catch you next time.